Hi everyone, it's Fitz with your daily delivery. I hope you're doing well. I am good. The Kansas State men play this afternoon. It's Sunday. Don't be confused. They do. And the women played yesterday afternoon and hammered the Kansas Jayhawks 90-60. And today we're going to talk about the K-State women, but mostly about basketball, women's basketball, and how it's growing in stature and growing in the public's eye because it's more competitive now. And I'm going to get into that as soon as I remind you that you better subscribe to this YouTube channel. The FBI will be investigating you if you don't. It's a stern warning that means absolutely nothing because I have no connections. Subscribe. Kansas State moved to 25-4 on the season with that win over KU. This is a really good K-State team. Maybe the best K-State team in school history. Well, the postseason will probably sort that out. Aoka Lee returned to action, although very limited, and she looks pretty hobbled after the game. Serena Sundell was her marvelous self as she slowly closes in on two records that, honestly, I didn't think would be surpassed, both by Shaylee Linning, a career assist and single season assist. We'll see if she can get it. 7 seniors in total walked for K-State and were part of the ceremony. And it's an incredible class. It's been a class that's led K-State to a lot of wins. But at 25 wins, they're not in the top 10. And the reason is women's basketball is that much better nowadays. You don't have to look too far back for the days when they'd pick a full field of an NCAA tournament and all 4 number 1 seeds would end up in the Final Four. In fact, it was pretty common. And if it didn't happen, it was like a number 2 snuck in. It just wasn't very competitive. And why? Because there wasn't enough talent. And on top of that, something that's going to change starting next year is for years, the women's game has had 15 scholarships and the men's game 13 scholarships. Now the men can now add 2 if they want to, and that's up to them. But my theory for many years was that enabled the elite conferences to hold 2 more players than everyone else. It didn't trickle down. The talent wasn't deep enough. But the women's game has advanced so far that young women are growing up in great numbers as athletes. And when I was young, women's basketball certainly wasn't what it was, just say, in the 90s. But the players there at that era were pretty much the best ones were all on a handful of teams. UConn, Tennessee, Stanford, you can go through the list. Now South Carolina is in that mix, and it wasn't very competitive. They would just absolutely destroy everyone except for when they played each other. But now that's not true. In recent years, we've seen the Final Four shaken up. Some upstarts would appear in the Final Four. They've got a ways to go, but there's been enough growing talent on the women's side that now really good players are getting missed on in the recruiting process, and they're developing. The young women are learning that you've got to put a lot into the game to get something out of it, and now we're seeing a great number of women become elite players. And Caitlin Clark is the greatest women's player of our time, in my book. And she ended up at Iowa, not at one of the other kind of, traditional powers. In the past, that young lady would have been at UConn, period. But the game's changing, and for the better. And that also means that Kansas State at 25-4 can be upset by pretty good teams with lesser records. Why? Because they got, well, you can't say dudes. Can you say chicks? I don't know. They got players. And they've got pretty good players. They're all over college basketball. Even not great teams typically have a really good player. And now the transfer portal is helping them move around. Tamara Poindexter on Kansas State's a perfect example of it. She came after 3 years at Tulsa, and K-State's much better for it. The women's games is interesting. I wish they would go to sites for their NCAA tournament and not home sites because it gives those home teams a huge advantage. Of course, Kansas State lost last year on its home court, so that didn't work out so well. But again, that was a really good Colorado team that could match up with K-State. We'll see what happens this postseason, but K-State is talented enough to make a run, particularly if Aoka Lee can get healthy and come back. But there's also a lot of really good teams out there that are going to stand in the way of anyone who wants to make it to the Final Four. It sounds like the men's game. The top seeds don't necessarily go all the way now. And that's really good for women's hoops.